The desert sun beat down mercilessly on Forward Operating Base Kandahar as Staff Sergeant Elena Rodriguez carefully cleaned the worn wooden stock of her grandfather's rifle. Around her, fellow snipers polished their state-of-the-art Barrett M82s and McMillan TAC-50s, their polymer stocks gleaming under the harsh Afghan light. The contrast couldn't have been more stark while her teammates wielded weapons that cost more than most people's cars. Elena cradled a 1943 Springfield M1903A4, a rifle that had seen action in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam before finding its way into her hands. "Still playing with that museum piece, Rodriguez?" Sergeant Jake Morrison called out from across the equipment tent, his voice dripping with familiar mockery. "Command's got a budget for real equipment, you know. You don't have to bring your great-grandfather's hunting rifle to a modern war." The laughter that followed was predictable, but Elena had heard it all before. For 6 months, ever since she'd arrived at this remote outpost in southeastern Afghanistan, her fellow snipers had made the same jokes, offered the same advice, and questioned the same decision. Why would anyone choose a 70-year-old bolt-action rifle over cutting-edge precision weapons designed specifically for modern warfare? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The answer lay in Elena's past, in a small town in New Mexico, where her grandfather, Miguel Rodriguez, had taught her to shoot when she was barely tall enough to hold a rifle steady. Miguel had been a Marine sniper in the Pacific Theater, island hopping from Guadalcanal to Iwo Jima with that same Springfield rifle. He'd never talked much about the war, but he'd taught Elena everything he knew about precision shooting, patience, and the art of making every shot count. "It's not about the rifle, Mia," he'd told her countless times during their weekend hunting trips in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. "It's about understanding your weapon, knowing its personality, its quirks, its capabilities. A rifle you've shot 10,000 times will always serve you better than the fanciest gun you've only fired 100. Elena had taken those words to heart. While other aspiring snipers focused on learning multiple weapon systems, she devoted herself entirely to mastering the Springfield. She knew exactly how the trigger felt at the moment of break, could predict the rifle's behavior in any weather condition, and had memorized the precise holdover needed for targets at any distance from 50 to 800 yards. When she'd enlisted in the Army and eventually qualified for sniper school, her instructors had been skeptical but impressed. Elena's scores with the Springfield consistently matched or exceeded those of students using modern equipment. Her groupings were tight, her first-round hits were reliable, and her field craft was exemplary. Still, they'd strongly recommended she transitioned to standard military rifles for deployment. Elena had respectfully declined. She'd put in a special request to carry her grandfather's rifle, citing family tradition and proven proficiency. After months of paperwork, background checks, and additional testing, Command had reluctantly approved her request. The rifle had been thoroughly inspected, modified with modern optics and accessories were necessary, but its essential character remained unchanged. Now, 6 months into her deployment, Elena had proven herself capable time and again. She'd successfully engaged targets at ranges from 200 to 600 yards, provided overwatch for patrol operations, and completed reconnaissance missions with distinction. Her kill count matched those of her peers, and her reliability was unquestioned. Yet the mockery continued. "I'm serious, Rodriguez," Morrison continued, warming to his favorite topic. "That antique might have been cutting edge when your grandfather was fighting the Japanese, but this is 2011. We're facing threats that require modern solutions. What happens when you need to engage a target at 1,000 yards? What happens when you need rapid follow-up shots? That bolt-action dinosaur is going to get you killed." Elena didn't respond immediately. She'd learned that arguing with Morrison and his supporters was pointless. They saw her choice as stubbornness, perhaps even disrespect for the advances in military technology. They couldn't understand that her rifle wasn't just a weapon. It was a connection to a legacy of service, a tangible link to her grandfather's sacrifice, and a tool she understood more intimately than they could comprehend. Instead, she continued her methodical cleaning routine. The Springfield's action cycled smoothly as she worked the bolt, checking for any sign of wear or debris. The rifle's Leupold scope, a concession to modern technology, was crystal clear and properly zeroed. Every component was in perfect condition, maintained with the obsessive care her grandfather had taught her. The truth was, Elena's rifle had advantages her critics didn't recognize. Its wooden stock didn't expand and contract with temperature changes the way polymer stocks did, maintaining consistent point of impact in extreme conditions. The rifle's steel barrel was thick and heavy, providing exceptional accuracy and heat resistance during extended firing sessions. Most importantly, the weapon's simplicity meant fewer things could go wrong in the field, but Elena kept these thoughts to herself. She'd learned that confidence spoken too loudly was often mistaken for arrogance, and she had no desire to fuel further antagonism among her unit. She'd prove her worth when it mattered, not in the equipment tent during downtime. As the afternoon wore on, the familiar routine of equipment maintenance continued around her. The other snipers cleaned their rifles with the same dedication, but Elena noticed the subtle differences in their approach. They maintained their weapons professionally and competently, but without the intimate familiarity that came from years of exclusive partnership with a single rifle. The radio crackled to life just as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting the Afghan landscape in shades of gold and crimson. Captain Sarah Mitchell's voice cut through the evening air with the crisp authority that had earned her respect throughout the battalion. All sniper teams to the briefing tent. Priority target package, immediate planning required. Elena secured her rifle in its case and joined the stream of soldiers moving toward the command area. The atmosphere had shifted noticeably. The casual banter and routine maintenance activities gave way to focused professionalism. This wasn't another patrol support mission or routine overwatch assignment. The urgency in Captain Mitchell's voice suggested something significant was developing. Inside the briefing tent, a large tactical map dominated the central table, marked with colored pins and overlaid acetate sheets showing elevation contours, known enemy positions, and potential approach routes. Elena took her usual position toward the back of the group, her notebook ready and her mind already shifting into mission planning mode. Captain Mitchell wasted no time with preliminaries. "Gentlemen and lady," she added with a nod toward Elena, "we've received actionable intelligence on a high-value target that's been on our priority list for months. Taliban commander Abdul Rashid Hassan, responsible for coordinating IED attacks throughout this province and the recent ambush that killed 3 Marines from 2nd Battalion." The name was familiar to everyone in the room. Hassan had been a ghost for over a year, appearing just long enough to orchestrate devastating attacks before melting back into the mountainous terrain he knew so well. His death or capture had been a standing objective for multiple units, but he'd proven frustratingly elusive. Intelligence indicates Hassan will be meeting with subordinate commanders tomorrow morning at this compound. Mitchell continued, pointing to a position on the map, roughly 12 kilometers northwest of their base. The meeting is scheduled for 0800 hours local time, and our sources suggest he'll remain on site for approximately 30 minutes before dispersing with his team. Elena studied the map carefully, her trained eye automatically calculating distances, elevation changes, and potential shooting positions. The compound sat in a valley surrounded by ridgelines that offered multiple overwatch positions, but the distances involved were significant. Most potential hide sites were between 800 and 1,200 meters from the target building. "Challenge," Captain Mitchell continued, is that this intelligence comes with a narrow window of opportunity. Hassan has changed meeting locations 3 times in the past month, apparently aware that coalition forces are tracking his movements. This may be our only chance to eliminate a target responsible for the deaths of dozens of coalition personnel. Sergeant Morrison raised his hand. "Ma'am, what's the engagement range looking like?" "My Barrett can reach out to 1,500 meters. Reliably, and Corporal Jackson's TAC-50 has even more range if needed." "That brings us to the tactical situation," Mitchell replied, her expression growing more serious. "The compound is positioned in a way that limits our approach options significantly. The most feasible hide sites offer engagement ranges between 1,000 and 1,200 meters. Additionally, the meeting is taking place in an interior courtyard, which means our window of opportunity will be extremely brief, possibly only seconds, when Hassan moves between buildings." Elena felt her pulse quicken. 1,200 meters was well beyond the range she'd ever engaged a target in combat, though she'd made successful shots at that distance during training. More concerning was the brief engagement window. With a bolt-action rifle, she'd have time for perhaps 1 shot. Maybe 2 if she was exceptionally fast and the target remained exposed. "The terrain also presents challenges," Mitchell continued. "The hide sites offer good concealment, but limited maneuverability. Once a shot is taken, extraction will be difficult and time-sensitive. Enemy response will be immediate and overwhelming." Corporal Jackson, Morrison's spotter and closest ally in the ongoing campaign against Elena's rifle choice, spoke up. "Ma'am, given the range and time constraints, wouldn't it make sense to prioritize our most advanced weapon systems? I mean no disrespect to Rodriguez, but this seems like a mission for our longest range, fastest follow-up capabilities." Elena remained silent, but she felt the familiar weight of judgment settling over the briefing. Once again, her rifle choice was becoming a focal point of tactical discussion. She understood the logic on paper. The newer rifles offered advantages in range, stopping power, and rate of fire. But she also knew her own capabilities and those of her grandfather's rifle better than anyone else in the room. Captain Mitchell studied the assembled snipers thoughtfully. The mission requires precision above all else. 1 shot, 1 kill. Hassan has survived multiple assassination attempts, and he won't provide a second opportunity if we miss. The sniper selected for this mission needs to be absolutely confident in their ability to make a first-round hit at extended range under pressure. The tent fell silent as the implications sank in. This wasn't a routine elimination of a mid-level target where a miss might result in another opportunity days or weeks later. Hassan's security awareness meant that any failed attempt would likely drive him deeper underground, potentially for months or even permanently. Elena found herself thinking about her grandfather's stories, the few times he'd shared details about his combat experiences. He'd spoken of moments when everything depended on a single shot, when the stakes were measured not in individual lives, but in the success or failure of entire operations. Those were the moments that separated competent snipers from exceptional ones. "I want each team to review the mission parameters and assess their capability honestly," Mitchell continued. "Range cards, waned calculations, equipment reliability, all of it. This isn't about ego or proving points. This is about eliminating a target who's responsible for killing our people, and will continue killing our people if we fail." As the briefing concluded and snipers began clustering around the map to study approach routes and potential hide sites, Elena remained in her seat, running calculations in her mind. 1,200 meters with the Springfield was certainly possible. She'd made similar shots during training exercises. But combat conditions introduced variables that couldn't be replicated on any training range. Morrison approached her as the tent began to empty. For once, his expression lacked its usual mockery. "Look, Rodriguez, I know we give you grief about that old rifle, but this mission is different. The stakes are too high for pride or tradition. Maybe you should consider. I'll be ready, Elena interrupted quietly. Whatever the captain decides, I'll be ready. The pre-dawn darkness of the Afghan mountains carried a chill that cut through even the warmest clothing, and Elena pulled her jacket tighter as she made her way to the equipment preparation area. Sleep had been elusive, not from nerves, but from the constant mental rehearsal that every sniper knew well. She'd run through the mission parameters dozens of times, calculating wind drift, bullet drop, and the precise timing required for success. Captain Mitchell had made her decision during the previous evening's final briefing. Despite the lobbying from Morrison and Jackson, despite the apparent logic of choosing the longest-range weapon system available, she'd selected Elena for the primary shooting position. The reasoning was simple and uncompromising. Elena had the highest first-round hit percentage at extended range among all the snipers in the unit. Stats don't lie, Mitchell had said, shutting down objections before they could be voiced. Rodriguez has a 97% first-round hit rate at ranges exceeding 800 meters. That's not luck, that's skill and consistency. This mission requires both. Now, as Elena methodically prepared her equipment in the pre-mission, quiet, she could feel the weight of that confidence. Morrison would serve as her spotter, a pairing that had been professionally effective despite their personal friction. Jackson and Corporal Williams would provide overwatch from a secondary position, ready to engage if the primary mission failed or if enemy response threatened the extraction. Elena's rifle case lay open on the preparation table, revealing the Springfield in all its utilitarian beauty. The weapon showed its age in ways that couldn't be hidden. Worn bluing on the barrel, smooth spots in the wooden stock where her grandfather's hands had gripped it through countless training sessions and combat deployments. But every mechanical component was in perfect condition, maintained with obsessive care and upgraded where modern technology offered genuine improvements. The Leupold scope mounted above the action was a concession to practicality. While her grandfather had made his legendary shots with iron sights, Elena recognized that the mission's requirements demanded every possible advantage. The scope's variable magnification would allow her to clearly identify Hassan at 1200 meters, and its precise adjustments would compensate for the challenging ballistics involved. "You sure about this, Rodriguez?" Morrison asked as he settled his own equipment beside hers. His tone lacked its usual edge, replaced by genuine concern. "I know Mitchell has confidence in you, but 1200 meters is a hell of a long shot under any circumstances. Add in time pressure, target movement, and the possibility of wind shifts." Elena continued her equipment check without looking up. "I've made this shot before, Sergeant. Multiple times during training, and once at 1100 meters during the Helmand deployment last year." "Training isn't combat," Morrison replied. "And that shot in Helmand was a static target, not a moving HVT with 30 seconds of exposure time." Elena finally met his gaze, and Morrison was surprised by the calm confidence he saw there. "My grandfather made a shot at 1300 meters on Sipan with this same rifle. Iron sights, moving target, under artillery fire. If he could do it with 1940s technology, I can do it with modern optics and better ammunition." Morrison studied her face for a moment, then nodded slowly. Despite his reservations about her equipment choice, he'd worked with Elena long enough to recognize her competence. Her field craft was exceptional, her patience under pressure was unmatched, and her shooting ability was undeniable. If anyone could make this shot work, it would be her. "All right then," he said, pulling out his spotting scope and range cards. "Let's talk through the setup. Based on yesterday's reconnaissance, we've got 3 potential hide sites that offer clear sight lines to the compound. Site Alpha is closest at 900 meters, but it's got limited concealment and difficult extraction. Site Bravo is at 1100 meters with better cover, and Site Charlie is at 1200 meters with excellent concealment, but the longest shot." Elena had already memorized every detail of the reconnaissance reports, but she appreciated Morrison's methodical approach. Site Charlie offers the best combination of concealment and observation angles. The extra 100 meters of range is manageable with proper preparation. That's what I figured you'd say, Morrison replied, spreading out detailed photos of the compound and surrounding terrain. The good news is that Site Charlie has natural wind barriers that should minimize crosswind effects. The bad news is that it's a single-shot opportunity. Once you fire, extraction needs to be immediate and fast. Elena nodded, studying the photographs with professional intensity. The compound's layout was relatively simple, a main building, flanked by two smaller structures, all surrounding a central courtyard where the meeting would take place. Hassan would be most vulnerable during the brief moments when he moved between buildings, and intelligence suggested he favored the eastern entrance to the main building. Range to the eastern entrance is 1,215 meters, Elena said, reading from her notes. Elevation difference is minus 210 feet, which means I need to adjust for both distance and angle. Wind should be minimal in the early morning, but I'll need to watch for thermal effects as the sun comes up. Morrison was impressed despite himself. Elena's preparation was thorough and professional, accounting for variables that less experienced snipers might overlook. Her grandfather's rifle might be ancient by military standards, but her approach to using it was thoroughly modern. What about ammunition? Morrison asked. You're still using that hand-loaded stuff, right? Elena smiled slightly, the first genuine smile Morrison had seen from her in weeks. Match-grade 168 grain Sierra Match King bullets, loaded to exact specifications for this rifle. My grandfather taught me that mass-produced ammunition is fine for most shooting, but when everything depends on one shot, you need ammunition that's specifically matched to your weapon. The preparation continued through the early morning hours, covering contingencies, communication protocols, and extraction procedures. As dawn approached, Elena felt the familiar calm that preceded important missions settling over her. This was what she'd trained for, what her grandfather had trained her for during those long afternoons in the New Mexico mountains. The radio crackled with final coordination, messages as the insertion helicopters prepared for departure. Elena secured her rifle in its transportation case and gathered her equipment, each item carefully selected and positioned for maximum efficiency. Morrison shouldered his own pack, heavy with spotting equipment, range-finding tools, and communication gear. Time to go prove that old rifle can still do the job, Morrison said, offering Elena what might have been the first genuinely supportive comment he'd ever made about her weapon choice. Elena secured the rifle case's straps and adjusted her equipment load. It's not about proving anything, Sergeant. It's about completing the mission. The Black Hawk helicopter's rotors beat a steady rhythm against the pre-dawn sky as Elena and Morrison sat in relative silence, their equipment secured between them and their minds focused on the mission ahead. The aircraft flew low and fast through the mountain valleys, using terrain masking to avoid detection by enemy forces who might be monitoring the approaches to Hassan's meeting location. Elena could feel the familiar weight of her grandfather's rifle across her knees, the case's hard plastic exterior, concealing the weapon that would soon be called upon to eliminate one of the most wanted men in Afghanistan. Through the helicopter's small window, she watched the landscape rushing past endless ridges and valleys carved by centuries of erosion, dotted with small villages and terraced fields that spoke to the resilience of the Afghan people. 5 minutes to insertion, the crew chief announced over the intercom, his voice barely audible above the engine noise. Elena and Morrison began their final equipment checks, ensuring that every piece of gear was properly secured and easily accessible. The insertion would be fast and potentially dangerous. The helicopter would hover just long enough for them to fast rope to the ground before departing immediately to avoid presenting a target. Morrison leaned close to Elena's ear. Remember, once we're on the ground, we've got approximately 3 hours to reach the hide site, set up, and prepare for the shot. That's tight timing, but it should give us adequate preparation time if we maintain a good pace. Elena nodded, her mind already shifting into the focused state that was essential for long-range precision shooting. She'd learned from her grandfather that successful sniping was as much mental as physical, the ability to control breathing, heart rate, and thoughts while maintaining absolute focus on the target and environmental conditions. The helicopter suddenly flared, its nose rising as the pilot brought the aircraft to a hover over their insertion point. Elena could see the rocky terrain below, carefully selected to provide concealment from observation, while offering a relatively direct route to their planned hide site. The insertion point was still over 4 kilometers from Site Charlie, requiring a careful movement through terrain that offered both opportunities and dangers. "Go, go, go!" the crew chief shouted, and Elena found herself sliding down the fast rope into the Afghan darkness, her equipment and rifle case secured to her body with professional efficiency. Morrison followed immediately, and within seconds the helicopter was disappearing into the distance, leaving them alone in the vast mountain wilderness. The silence after the helicopter's departure was profound. Elena paused for a moment to let her night vision adjust completely, then began checking her equipment for any damage from the insertion. Everything appeared secure and undamaged. The rifle case had absorbed the impact of landing without issue, and her other gear remained properly positioned and accessible. "Movement begins now," Morrison whispered, consulting his GPS unit and compass to confirm their position. "We follow the ridgeline north for 2 kilometers and descend into the valley approach to Site Charlie. Maintain noise discipline. We're not expected to encounter enemy forces, but Hassan's security is known to patrol randomly through this area." Elena shouldered her equipment and began the careful movement toward their objective. The terrain was challenging but manageable, loose rock and occasional steep sections that required attention to footing, but nothing that would significantly slow their progress. Her physical conditioning was excellent, honed by months of mountain operations and a lifetime of hunting in similarly demanding terrain. As they moved through the darkness, Elena found her thoughts turning to her grandfather's experiences in the Pacific Theater. He'd described similar movements through hostile territory, carrying the same rifle that now rode on her back, approaching positions where a single shot would determine the outcome of larger operations. The continuity of that experience, the same weapon, the same fundamental challenges, the same ultimate responsibility, provided a connection to military history that few soldiers ever experienced. The night air was crisp and clear, with minimal wind at ground level. These were ideal conditions for long-range shooting, and Elena made mental notes of the atmospheric factors that would affect her shot. Temperature was cool but stable, humidity was low, and the barometric pressure appeared consistent. All of these factors would need to be incorporated into her firing solution when the time came. Morrison proved to be an excellent movement partner, maintaining proper spacing and noise discipline while navigating efficiently through the difficult terrain. Despite their philosophical differences about rifle selection, Elena had to admit that his fieldcraft was exemplary. He moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd spent years in similar environments, and his navigation skills were keeping them precisely on schedule. 2 hours into their movement, they reached the final approach to Site Charlie. The hide site was located on a ridge overlooking the target compound, carefully selected during reconnaissance to provide clear sight lines while offering natural concealment and protection. From their current position, Elena could see the distant lights of the compound below, still several hundred meters away, but clearly visible in the clear mountain air. "Final approach," Morrison whispered, leading the way up a steep goat path that would bring them to their shooting position. "Remember, once we're in position, movement will be extremely limited. Everything needs to be perfect the first time." Elena followed carefully, her rifle case secured to prevent any noise that might compromise their position. The weight of her equipment seemed insignificant compared to the weight of responsibility she carried. In a few hours, she would be expected to eliminate a target at one of the longest ranges she'd ever attempted in combat, with stakes that extended far beyond her own unit or even her own army. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The final 100 meters to Site Charlie required extreme care. The position had been selected not only for its tactical advantages, but also for its concealment from the compound below. Any movement or noise during the final approach could potentially compromise the entire mission, alerting Hassan's security forces to the presence of coalition snipers in the area. Elena found herself thinking about the hundreds of hours she'd spent with her grandfather, learning not just marksmanship, but the entire art of fieldcraft. He'd taught her to move like a ghost, to become part of the landscape, to observe without being observed. Those lessons, learned during hunting trips in the mountains of New Mexico, were now proving their worth in the mountains of Afghanistan. As they reached the final position, Elena could see the compound clearly for the first time. The intelligence reports had been accurate: 3 buildings arranged around a central courtyard, with clear lines of sight from their elevated position. The range to the main building's eastern entrance, where Hassan was expected to appear, was exactly as calculated, 1,215 meters. Morrison immediately began setting up his spotting position, arranging his equipment for maximum effectiveness while maintaining concealment. Elena began her own preparation routine, carefully removing her rifle from its case and beginning the methodical process that would culminate in what might be the most important shot of her military career. The hide site at Site Charlie exceeded Elena's expectations in every meaningful way. The position offered not only excellent concealment behind natural rock formations, but also a stable shooting platform that would minimize the variables affecting her shot. As she carefully arranged her equipment, Elena could feel the familiar sense of calm focus that preceded important engagements, a mental state her grandfather had called the quiet place where external distractions faded away and only the fundamentals of marksmanship remained. Morrison had positioned himself slightly to Elena's left, his powerful spotting scope already focused on the compound below. The coordination between sniper and spotter was crucial for long-range engagements, particularly when the shot opportunity might last only seconds. Morrison would provide real-time information about wind conditions, target movement, and environmental changes that could affect the shot's accuracy. "Target compound is quiet," Morrison reported in a whisper barely audible even at close range. "No visible movement, no signs of early arrival. We're 30 minutes ahead of the expected meeting time, which gives us adequate preparation opportunity." Elena nodded without taking her attention away from her rifle preparation. The Springfield lay before her on a specialized shooting mat, its wooden stock resting on a carefully adjusted bipod that elevated the weapon to the perfect height for the shot. Every component had been checked and rechecked, the scope's adjustments were verified. The action cycled smoothly, and the carefully hand-loaded ammunition was ready in a small case beside her. Shooting position. The process of preparing for a 1,200-meter shot required meticulous attention to details that would be irrelevant at shorter ranges. Elena consulted her range cards, detailed notes that accounted for the specific ballistics of her rifle and ammunition combination at various distances and environmental conditions. The data had been developed through countless hours of practice and refinement, creating a comprehensive reference that eliminated guesswork during critical moments. "Environmental conditions are holding steady," Elena reported quietly. "Temperature 42 degrees, minimal wind at ground level, humidity low. Barometric pressure appears stable based on the clear visibility." Morrison made his own observations. Through the spotting scope, comparing the actual conditions to their pre-mission planning, "I'm seeing very slight thermal activity beginning as the sun comes up. but nothing significant enough to affect bullet trajectory at this range. Wind indicators in the valley show minimal lateral movement. We're looking at less than 3 miles per hour crosswind. Elena began the process of adjusting her scope for the specific conditions and range. The Springfield's Leupold scope allowed for precise adjustments to compensate for bullet drop and wind drift, but the calculations required absolute accuracy. A single click of adjustment error at 1,200 meters could result in a miss measured in feet rather than inches. The mathematics of long-range shooting were complex, but familiar to Elena. Her 168-grain Sierra Match King bullets would drop approximately 32 feet during their flight to the target, requiring significant elevation adjustment to compensate. The minimal crosswind would cause lateral drift of perhaps 6 inches, easily manageable with proper scope adjustment. More challenging were the subtle effects of shooting at a downward angle, which would cause the bullet to impact slightly higher than calculated for the horizontal distance. "First light is beginning to show in the eastern sky," Morrison observed. "We should start seeing movement in the compound within the next 15 to 20 minutes if the intelligence timeline is accurate." Elena finished her scope adjustments and settled into her final shooting position. The rifle felt comfortable and familiar against her shoulder, its weight and balance as known to her as her own heartbeat. She controlled her breathing, allowing her heart rate to settle into the steady rhythm that would be essential for the precise shot placement required. Through her scope, the compound appeared surprisingly clear and detailed. The 1,200-meter distance, which seemed vast when considered abstractly, became manageable when viewed through quality optics. Elena could clearly see the eastern entrance to the main building where Hassan was expected to appear, could observe the courtyard where the meeting would take place, and could identify the specific locations where her target might present himself. Movement in the compound, Morrison reported suddenly, his voice carrying a new tension. 2 individuals moving toward the main building from the southern approach. Not the primary target, these appear to be security personnel conducting advance preparations. Elena observed the movement through her own scope, noting the individuals' positions and behavior. The presence of advanced security was expected and actually provided confirmation that the intelligence about Hassan's meeting was accurate. The security personnel were conducting exactly the type of preparation that would precede the arrival of a high-value target. "Additional movement," Morrison continued. "Vehicle approaching from the north looks like a small truck or SUV. This could be our primary target arriving early." Elena's pulse quickened slightly, but her training kept her breathing steady and controlled. Early arrival would be challenging, she'd planned. Her preparation timeline, assuming Hassan would arrive precisely on schedule. However, early was better than late or not at all, and she was ready to engage if the opportunity presented itself. Through her scope, Elena watched as the vehicle stopped outside the compound's northern entrance. 3 individuals exited the vehicle, moving with the purposeful efficiency that suggested military or paramilitary training. One of the figures appeared to match the physical description of Hassan from intelligence briefings: medium height, dark beard, distinctive walk. That favored his left leg due to an old injury. "Possible target identification," Elena whispered. "Individual matching Hassan's description approaching the main building from the north entrance." Morrison adjusted his spotting scope for optimal observation. "I concur, physical characteristics match intelligence descriptions. Target is moving toward the main building but using the northern entrance instead of the expected eastern approach." Elena smoothly adjusted her aim point to account for the different entrance location. The northern entrance was actually slightly closer, 1,190 meters rather than 1,215. The change was minor but required recalculation of her scope adjustments to ensure precision. "Target has entered the main building," Morrison reported. "Based on the compound layout and meeting schedule, he should reappear in the courtyard within the next 10 to 15 minutes. Elena maintained her position and focus, her rifle trained on the courtyard area where Hassan would most likely appear. The waiting was always the most challenging part of long-range engagements, maintaining perfect readiness, while managing the natural tendency toward muscle tension and mental fatigue that came with extended periods of intense concentration. Minutes stretched like hours as Elena maintained her shooting position, the crosshairs of her scope trained steadily on the courtyard where Hassan would soon appear. The morning sun had begun to cast long shadows across the compound, creating patterns of light and dark that would need to be considered when the moment for engagement arrived. Through her peripheral vision, she could see Morrison's complete focus on his spotting scope, ready to provide the crucial information that would make the difference between success and failure. "Additional vehicles arriving," Morrison reported in a barely audible whisper. "3 more trucks approaching from different directions. This appears to be the main meeting beginning to assemble." Elena watched through her scope as the compound came alive with activity. Security personnel moved with increased urgency, positioning themselves at strategic points around the buildings. The coordination and professionalism of their movements suggested that Hassan's security detail was well-trained and experienced, taking no chances with their principal safety. "Target reacquisition," Morrison announced suddenly. Hassan emerging from the main building, moving toward the central courtyard area. Elena's breathing automatically settled into the controlled pattern she'd practiced thousands of times. Through her scope, she could clearly see the figure that matched Hassan's description walking purposefully across the courtyard. At 1,200 meters, even with her high-quality optics, the target appeared small but clearly defined against the contrasting background of the compound's architecture. "Range confirmed at 1,195 meters, Morrison provided. "Wind conditions remain minimal, less than 2 miles per hour from the southwest. Target is moving slowly, appears to be conducting preliminary discussions with subordinates." Elena made minor adjustments to her scope settings, accounting for the precise range and environmental conditions Morrison had confirmed. Her grandfather's rifle felt solid and steady beneath her, its familiar weight and balance providing confidence even at this extreme range. Every component of her shooting system, rifle, scope, ammunition, and shooting position, had been optimized for exactly this type of engagement. "Hassan is stationary now," Morrison continued his commentary. "Positioned in the center of the courtyard, engaged in conversation with 3 other individuals. This could be our optimal engagement opportunity." Elena studied the target through her scope, noting Hassan's position and the presence of other individuals in the immediate area. The shot would need to be absolutely precise, not only to ensure Hassan's elimination, but also to minimize the risk to non-combatants who might be in the vicinity. Her grandfather had taught her that precision shooting was as much about what you didn't hit as what you did. The crosshairs settled naturally on Hassan's center mass, the most reliable aim point for a shot at this distance. Elena's breathing became completely controlled, her heart rate steady, her mind focused exclusively on the fundamentals of marksmanship that had been drilled into her through years of training and practice. "Stand by," Morrison whispered, recognizing the signs that Elena was preparing to engage. "Wind remains steady, no changes in environmental conditions. Target is stationary in optimal position." Elena's world narrowed to the essential elements of the shot: her breathing, the crosshairs centered on Hassan's torso, the gentle pressure of her finger against the Springfield's familiar trigger. She could feel her grandfather's presence, as if 70 years of military tradition and family legacy were converging on this single moment. The rifle that had served in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam was about to add another chapter to its history in the mountains of Afghanistan. "Target acquiring additional security," Morrison reported with slight urgency in his voice. "Multiple individuals move into flanking positions. Window of opportunity may be closing." Elena maintained her focus, knowing that external pressure could easily compromised the precision required for success at this range. Her grandfather had faced similar situations, moments when everything depended on a single shot fired under less than ideal conditions. She drew on that legacy now, letting decades of training and preparation guide her actions. Through her scope, she could see Hassan clearly positioned in the courtyard, his body language suggesting he was giving instructions to his subordinates. The distance was extreme but manageable, the environmental conditions were favorable, and her equipment was performing perfectly. All the variables were as optimal as they were likely to become. "Preparing to engage," Elena whispered, her voice barely audible even to Morrison only feet away. The Springfield's trigger broke cleanly and predictably, exactly as it had thousands of times before during training and previous combat engagements. Elena felt the rifle's recoil against her shoulder, heard the sharp crack of the cartridge detonating, and watched through her scope as the bullet began its journey across 1,200 meters of Afghan, mountainous terrain dotted that distance. Even with a muzzle velocity exceeding 2,600 feet per second, the bullet's flight time was significant enough that Elena could observe its effects in what felt like slow motion. The sound of the shot would take nearly 4 seconds to reach the compound, giving her precious moments to observe the results before Hassan's security detail could react. Through her scope, Elena watched Hassan suddenly collapse, his body language indicating a center mass hit exactly as intended. The carefully hand-loaded Sierra Match King bullet had performed flawlessly, maintaining its accuracy and terminal effectiveness across the extreme range. "Target down," Morrison confirmed, his professional excitement evident despite his whispered voice. "Clean hit, center mass." Hassan as motionless appears to be immediately incapacitated. The compound erupted into organized chaos as Hassan's security detail responded to the sniper attack. Elena could see individuals taking cover behind vehicles and buildings while others moved to check on their fallen leader. The professionalism of their response confirmed that these were experienced fighters, but their reaction time had been too slow to prevent the successful engagement. "Time to go," Elena said calmly, already beginning to secure her rifle for extraction. The mission's primary objective had been accomplished, but remaining in position would be increasingly dangerous as enemy forces organized a response and search effort. Morrison was already packing his spotting equipment with practiced efficiency. "Extraction route is clear from our current position. Enemy forces are focused on the compound area and haven't identified our location yet." Elena carefully secured her grandfather's rifle in its protective case, the weapon having once again proven its effectiveness in combat. The 70-year-old Springfield had just eliminated one of Afghanistan's most wanted terrorists at a range that would have challenged even the most modern sniper systems. As they began their movement away from Site Charlie, Elena allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The critics who had mocked her ancient equipment would have to reconsider their assumptions. More importantly, Hassan's reign of terror was over, and the coalition forces he'd been targeting would be safer because of this morning's work. "Outstanding shooting," Morrison said as they moved carefully down the ridgeline. For the first time since Elena had known him, his voice carried genuine respect rather than skepticism. "I've never seen a cleaner shot at that range, regardless of the weapon system used." Elena nodded her thanks but remained focused on the extraction. Success in sniper operations was measured not just by hitting the target, but by surviving to fight another day. They still had several kilometers of hostile territory to cross before reaching their extraction point, and Hassan's forces would be actively searching for them within the hour. The morning sun was now fully above the eastern mountains, casting long shadows that would both help and hinder their movement back to safety. Elena adjusted her equipment load and settled into the steady pace that would carry them away from the target area and back to the relative safety of their forward operating base. Behind them, the compound continued to show signs of intense activity as Hassan's subordinates dealt with the aftermath of losing their leader. Elena didn't look back. Her grandfather had taught her that successful snipers focused forward, always moving toward the next objective rather than dwelling on past achievements. The mission had been a complete success, but Elena knew that her critics would find new reasons to question her equipment choices. The fact that a 70-year-old rifle had eliminated a high-value target at 1,200 meters wouldn't necessarily change deeply held beliefs about the superiority of modern weapon systems. That was acceptable to Elena. She'd proven what needed to be proven, both to herself and to anyone willing to look objectively at the results. Her grandfather's rifle had once again demonstrated that skill, preparation, and familiarity were more important than the latest technology. As they disappeared into the Afghan wilderness, Elena carried with her the satisfaction of a mission accomplished, and the knowledge that she'd honored her family's military tradition in the most meaningful way possible. The Springfield had added another chapter to its remarkable history, and Elena had proven herself worthy of carrying on her grandfather's legacy. The extraction route that had seemed straightforward during mission planning now presented a series of challenges that tested every aspect of Elena and Morrison's fieldcraft training. The successful elimination of Hassan had triggered an immediate and comprehensive response from his security forces, transforming what should have been a routine withdrawal into a carefully orchestrated escape through increasingly hostile territory. Radio intercepts indicate they're organizing search teams, Morrison reported as they moved quickly but carefully along a goat path that wound down from the ridge line. Multiple units converging on this general area, but they haven't pinpointed our exact location yet. Elena adjusted her rifle case's carrying position and maintained the steady pace that would get them to the extraction point without exhausting their energy reserves. The weight of her equipment felt insignificant compared to the satisfaction of mission success, but she remained acutely aware that their survival depended on reaching friendly territory before Hassan's forces could organize an effective pursuit. The terrain that had provided concealment during their approach now worked against rapid movement. Loose rock surfaces required careful footing to avoid noise that might reveal their position, while the steep descent demanded constant attention to maintain balance under the load of their equipment. Elena found herself grateful for the countless hours of mountain training that had prepared her for exactly these conditions. Aircraft activity increasing, Morrison observed, pointing toward distant helicopters that were beginning systematic searches of the surrounding valleys. They're starting with the most obvious escape routes, which gives us an advantage since we're using the tertiary path. Elena nodded, recognizing the wisdom of their pre-mission planning. The extraction route had been selected specifically because it avoided the most direct paths that enemy forces would naturally focus on during their initial search efforts. However, the advantage would be temporary eventually. Hassan's forces would expand their search to include all possible routes. As they continued their descent, Elena's mind processed the tactical situation with the analytical approach her grandfather had taught her. The enemy had advantages in numbers, local knowledge, and motivation, but they also had disadvantages in organization, communication, and time pressure. The key to successful extraction was exploiting those disadvantages while minimizing exposure to the enemy's strengths. Checkpoint Alpha in sight, Morrison announced, referring to a predetermined navigation point that marked their progress toward the extraction zone. We're maintaining good time, approximately 40 minutes to the pickup site, if we can sustain this pace. Elena checked her watch and compared their progress to the mission timeline. The extraction helicopter would arrive at the designated landing zone in exactly 37 minutes, providing a narrow but adequate window for them to reach safety. Delaying the extraction wasn't an option. The helicopter crew would face increasing danger the longer they remained in hostile territory. The sound of vehicles in the distance indicated that Hassan's forces were beginning to establish checkpoints on the main roads leading away from the compound. This was expected and had been planned for, but it confirmed that their enemies were responding with the professionalism and efficiency that had made Hassan such an effective leader. His death would create a power vacuum, but his organization's immediate response capabilities remained intact. "We need to cross the valley floor here," Morrison said, indicating an open area that would require them to move without the concealment they'd enjoyed on the ridgeline. Approximately 200 meters of exposure, but the alternative routes would add 20 minutes to our timeline. Elena studied the terrain ahead, calculating risks and options with the tactical mindset that had been drilled into her through years of training. The open ground presented clear dangers, but the time factor was equally threatening. Missing the extraction helicopter would leave them stranded in hostile territory with limited options for reaching safety. "We go direct," Elena decided. Fast movement across the open ground, then back to concealment on the opposite ridge. 2 minutes of maximum exposure versus 20 minutes of extended vulnerability. Morrison nodded his agreement, recognizing the logic of Elena's assessment. They prepared for the sprint across open ground, securing equipment to prevent noise or loss during rapid movement, and identifying the precise route that would minimize their exposure time. The crossing went smoothly, their physical conditioning and training allowing them to maintain speed while carrying heavy loads across uneven terrain. Elena's rifle case remained secure throughout the movement, protecting the weapon that had just completed one of the most significant missions of her military career. "Extraction site visible," Morrison reported as they reached concealment on the far side of the valley. "No signs of enemy activity in the immediate area, but we should assume surveillance is possible from multiple directions." Elena could see the designated landing zone through a gap in the rocks, a relatively flat area large enough for helicopter operations, but small enough to require precise navigation by the aircraft crew. The site had been selected during reconnaissance for its tactical advantages, but like all compromises in military operations, it presented trade-offs between accessibility and security. The final approach to the extraction site required extreme caution. Hassan's forces would likely anticipate that any attackers would attempt to escape by helicopter, making landing zones obvious targets for ambush or interdiction efforts. Elena and Morrison moved with the careful precision of soldiers who understood that survival often depended on the last few minutes of an operation. "Inbound helicopter on schedule," Morrison announced, listening to radio communications through his earpiece. "Pilot reports no hostile activity observed during approach, but they're requesting immediate extraction due to increasing enemy response in the area." Elena could hear the distant sound of rotor blades echoing off the mountain valleys, the distinctive signature of a Black Hawk helicopter approaching at low altitude. The sound was both reassuring and concerning. Reassuring because it meant their extraction was proceeding as planned. Concerning because it would also be audible to any enemy forces in the area. "Security sweep complete," Morrison reported after a final check of their surroundings. "Extraction site appears clear, no signs of enemy observation or preparation for ambush." The helicopter appeared suddenly over the ridgeline, flying low and fast in the tactical approach that minimized exposure to ground fire while allowing rapid insertion or extraction operations. Elena felt a surge of relief at the sight of the aircraft, but she maintained her tactical alertness until they were actually aboard and departing the area. "Go, go, go," Morrison shouted over the rotor noise as the helicopter touched down in the landing zone. Elena sprinted toward the aircraft with her equipment, feeling the downwash from the rotor blades and smelling the distinctive odor of aviation fuel that meant safety and successful mission completion. Within seconds, both snipers were aboard the helicopter and the aircraft was lifting off, gaining altitude and speed as it departed the extraction site. Elena secured her rifle case and settled into her seat, finally allowing herself to process the full implications of what had just occurred. The flight back to Forward Operating Base Kandahar passed in relative quiet, with Elena and Morrison each processing the morning's events in their own way. The successful elimination of Hassan represented a significant tactical victory, but Elena found herself thinking more about the personal implications of what had occurred. She had proven, beyond any reasonable doubt, that her grandfather's rifle remained an effective tool for modern military operations. Through the helicopter's window, Elena watched the Afghan landscape scrolling past below, the same mountains and valleys where her grandfather's contemporaries had fought different wars, where soldiers throughout history had faced the fundamental challenge of eliminating enemies at extreme range with single, precisely placed shots. The continuity of that experience provided a perspective that few modern soldiers ever gained. Outstanding! Work out there, the helicopter's crew chief shouted over the engine noise, giving Elena a thumbs up that conveyed respect and admiration. Word of the successful mission had clearly spread quickly through the aviation community, and Elena could see genuine appreciation in the expressions of the aircrew who had risked their own safety to extract her and Morrison from hostile territory. Morrison sat quietly across from her, his usual skepticism replaced by what appeared to be thoughtful respect. Elena could see him occasionally glancing at her rifle case, as if seeing the weapon in an entirely new light. The successful 1,200-meter shot had challenged assumptions he'd held for years about the relationship between equipment sophistication and operational effectiveness. As the helicopter approached their base, Elena could see increased activity on the ground, vehicles moving with purpose, personnel gathering in areas that suggested briefings or mission preparation. The general sense of urgency that accompanied significant intelligence developments. Hassan's death would create immediate opportunities for follow-up operations against his network, and the entire base appeared to be mobilizing to exploit those opportunities. Landing in 2 minutes, the pilot announced over the intercom. Intelligence. Personnel will be waiting to debrief. This one's got attention all the way up the chain of command. Elena secured her equipment and prepared for the return to base routine that would mark the official conclusion of her mission. She knew that the debriefing process would be thorough and detailed, covering every aspect of the operation from insertion to extraction. The successful elimination of such a high-value target would generate analysis and documentation that would influence future operations and tactical procedures. The helicopter touched down on the base's main landing pad, and Elena could immediately see the reception committee that had assembled to meet them. Captain Mitchell stood with several officers she didn't recognize, their rank insignia suggesting that news of the mission's success had reached higher command levels. The presence of senior personnel indicated that Hassan's elimination was being recognized as a significant achievement. Rodriguez, Morrison, Captain Mitchell called out as they approached with their equipment. Outstanding work out there. I want a preliminary brief in 10 minutes, followed by detailed debriefing with intelligence. Personnel. This operation has generated significant interest at brigade and division levels. Elena nodded her acknowledgement while securing her rifle case. The attention was expected, but not entirely welcome. She preferred to focus on mission preparation and execution rather than the administrative follow-up that accompanied successful operations. However, she understood that detailed analysis of the FA operation would help improve future missions and potentially save lives. As they walked toward the command area, Elena noticed the changed atmosphere among her fellow soldiers. Word of the successful long-range shot had clearly spread throughout the base, and she could see expressions of respect and curiosity that hadn't been present before the mission. The skepticism that had followed her grandfather's rifle was being replaced by genuine interest in its capabilities. 1,200 meters with a bolt-action rifle, she heard one soldier saying to another as they passed. That's some serious shooting, regardless of what equipment you're using. Morrison overheard the comment and looked at Elena with an expression that might have been apologetic. You know, Rodriguez, I owe you an apology. I've been giving you grief about that rifle for months, but today proved that I was focused on the wrong things. It's not about the equipment, it's about the shooter. Elena appreciated the acknowledgement, but remained focused on the tactical lessons of the mission. Every weapon system has advantages and disadvantages, Sergeant. The key is understanding your equipment well enough to maximize the advantages while minimizing the weaknesses. As they entered the command building, Elena could see the intelligence personnel who would conduct her detailed debriefing. Their presence reminded her that her mission was part of a larger campaign against terrorist networks operating throughout Afghanistan. Hassan's elimination would create intelligence, opportunities, and operational possibilities that extended far beyond her individual shot. "Before we begin the formal debriefing," Captain Mitchell said, "I want you both to know that preliminary reports indicate Hassan's death has already disrupted planned attacks against coalition forces. Intelligence intercepts suggest his network is in disarray, trying to establish new leadership while dealing with the psychological impact of losing someone they considered untouchable." Elena felt satisfaction at this news, knowing that her shot had saved lives beyond just eliminating a single terrorist leader. The ripple effects of successful sniper operations often extended far beyond the immediate target, disrupting enemy morale and operational capabilities in ways that were difficult to quantify, but undeniably valuable. The debriefing room was filled with maps, photographs, and communication equipment that spoke to the complexity of modern military intelligence operations. Elena took her seat at the conference table, her rifle case beside her, and prepared to provide the detailed account that would help her commanders understand exactly how the mission had been accomplished. "Let's start with equipment performance," one of the intelligence officers began. "We're particularly interested in the ballistic data from your shot range, environmental conditions, ammunition performance, and scope adjustments. This information will be valuable for future long-range engagements." Elena opened her notebook and began the systematic review that would document every aspect of her grandfather's rifle's performance during one of the most significant shots in its long history of military service. The debriefing session stretched through the afternoon, with intelligence officers, ballistics experts, and tactical analysts examining every detail of Elena's successful engagement of Hassan. The level of interest surprised her. She'd expected routine documentation, but the 1,200-meter shot with a World War II-era rifle had generated genuine scientific curiosity about the factors that made such precision possible. "The ballistic performance data you've provided is remarkable," commented Major Patricia Sullivan, a ballistics expert who had flown in specifically to analyze the mission. "Your grandfather's rifle, despite its age, achieved accuracy that matches or exceeds what we typically see from much more expensive modern systems. That suggests factors beyond just equipment sophistication." Elena had spent considerable time explaining her ammunition preparation process, the extensive practice regimen that had familiarized her with the rifle's specific characteristics, and the fieldcraft techniques that had enabled the successful shot. The officer seemed particularly interested in the relationship between shooter familiarity and weapon performance, a factor that was often overlooked in discussions of military equipment effectiveness. "What's most impressive," Major Sullivan continued, "is the consistency of your shooting with this particular rifle. Your training records show exceptional accuracy across multiple range sessions, weather conditions, and tactical scenarios. That kind of consistency usually requires either exceptional natural ability or an extraordinary commitment to mastering a specific weapon system." Elena nodded, thinking about the countless hours she'd spent with her grandfather, learning not just marksmanship, but the deeper understanding of ballistics, environmental factors, and mental preparation that separated competent shooters from exceptional ones. "My grandfather taught me that a rifle you've shot 10,000 times will always outperform a rifle you've shot 100 times, regardless of which one is theoretically superior." As the formal debriefing concluded, Elena expected to return to routine duties and normal base operations. However, she soon discovered that news of her achievement had spread well beyond her immediate unit. Other sniper teams began requesting demonstrations of her equipment and techniques, curious to understand how a 70-year-old rifle had achieved results that challenged their assumptions about modern military technology. "I'll admit I was wrong about your rifle choice," Sergeant Jackson said during an impromptu gathering of sniper personnel that evening. "I've been shooting military rifles for 8 years, and I don't think I could make that shot with any of my equipment. There's obviously something to be said for the kind of familiarity you have with your weapon." Elena appreciated the acknowledgement, but she also noticed that not everyone shared Jackson's willingness to reconsider their positions. Several snipers remained convinced that her success was more about luck than skill, and that modern equipment would always provide superior capabilities in the long term. "One successful shot doesn't prove anything," commented Corporal Martinez, one of the unit's newer snipers. Hassan was a stationary target in good weather conditions. What happens when you need rapid follow-up shots, or when you're engaging multiple targets, or when environmental conditions are challenging? That bolt-action rifle is still going to limit your capabilities. Elena didn't argue the point. She understood that deeply held beliefs about equipment and tactics weren't easily changed by single incidents, regardless of how dramatic or successful those incidents might be. More importantly, she recognized that Martinez's concerns weren't entirely invalid. Different missions would require different capabilities, and her rifle choice represented trade-offs that might not always be optimal. However, Elena also noticed increased interest from some unexpected quarters. Several senior non-commissioned officers began asking detailed questions about her training methods, ammunition preparation techniques, and the mental discipline required for extreme-range shooting. These conversations suggested that her approach might have applications beyond just her specific equipment choice. "The psychological aspects of what you accomplished are as impressive as the technical ones," observed Master Sergeant Williams, the base's senior sniper instructor. "Maintaining focus and confidence during a shot of that difficulty, under those pressure conditions, requires mental preparation that goes beyond just equipment familiarity. That's something we might want to incorporate into our training programs." Elena found these discussions more valuable than the debates about equipment superiority. The mental and technical disciplines required for precision shooting were transferable regardless of the specific weapon system used, and sharing those techniques could improve the overall effectiveness of her unit's sniper operations. During her off-duty time, Elena began receiving requests for informal instruction from younger soldiers who were interested in improving their own shooting skills. These sessions provided opportunities to share the lessons her grandfather had taught her about patience, preparation, and the systematic approach to marksmanship that produced consistent results under pressure. "The most important thing to understand," Elena explained to a group of junior soldiers, "is that exceptional shooting isn't about any single factor equipment, ammunition, or even natural ability. It's about the systematic development of multiple skills that work together: technical knowledge, physical conditioning, mental discipline, and most importantly, the patience to practice these skills until they become automatic." The training sessions also allowed Elena to observe how different soldiers responded to instruction about precision shooting techniques. Some grasped the concepts quickly and showed immediate improvement in their accuracy, while others struggled with the mental discipline required for consistent performance under pressure. "Your grandfather's training methods are interesting," commented Lieutenant Sarah Chun, who had observed several of the informal instruction sessions. "The emphasis on systematic preparation and mental conditioning seems to produce more consistent results than the traditional approach of just teaching technical skills." As the weeks passed, Elena noticed that the initial excitement about her 1,200-meter shot was gradually fading into routine acceptance. This was natural and expected. Military organizations had to maintain focus on current operations. rather than dwelling on past achievements. However, she also noticed that the respect for her capabilities had become permanent, replacing the previous skepticism with genuine professional recognition. The most significant change was in her relationship with Morrison and the other experienced snipers in her unit. The successful Hassan mission had eliminated the underlying tension that had characterized their previous interactions, replacing it with the mutual respect that came from shared professional accomplishment. 3 months after the Hassan mission, Elena found herself preparing for another high-stakes sniper operation. But the dynamics within her unit had fundamentally changed. The rifle case that once drew mockery and skepticism now commanded respect and curiosity, and her fellow snipers had begun asking serious questions about the training methods and equipment, preparation techniques that had enabled her remarkable shot. The impact of Hassan's elimination had extended far beyond the immediate tactical victory. Intelligence reports indicated that his terrorist network had fragmented into smaller, less effective groups, and the psychological effect of his death had reduced recruitment and operational effectiveness throughout the region. Elena's single shot had contributed to a measurable improvement in security conditions for coalition forces and Afghan civilians alike. "Rodriguez, you've got visitors," Captain Mitchell announced as Elena finished cleaning her grandfather's rifle following a routine training session. "Some people from higher headquarters want to discuss your equipment and techniques. Apparently, your approach to precision shooting has attracted attention at levels well above our little operation here." Elena secured her rifle and followed Captain Mitchell to the command building, where she found herself facing a delegation of officers and civilian contractors, whose presence suggested that her methods had indeed attracted high-level interest. The group included representatives from Army Marksmanship Unit, Special Operations Command, and several defense contractors involved in sniper system development. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez," began Colonel Robert Anderson, a senior officer whose credentials indicated extensive experience in special operations. "Your successful engagement of Hassan has generated considerable interest in the relationship between shooter proficiency and equipment sophistication. We're hoping you can help us understand the factors that enabled such exceptional performance with a weapon that most people would consider obsolete." Elena spent the next several hours explaining her training background, ammunition preparation methods, and the systematic approach to marksmanship that her grandfather had taught her. The officers and contractors asked detailed questions about everything from her mental preparation techniques to the specific modifications she'd made to adapt the vintage rifle for modern military use. "What's most interesting to us," commented Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a civilian researcher specializing in human performance factors, "is the level of consistency you've achieved through extended practice with a single weapon system. Current military training tends to emphasize adaptability across multiple platforms, but your approach suggests there may be advantages to specialization that we haven't fully explored." The discussion revealed that Elena's success had challenged some fundamental assumptions about military equipment procurement and training methodologies. The defense industry's focus on developing increasingly sophisticated weapon systems might have overlooked the importance of shooter proficiency and equipment familiarity in determining real-world effectiveness. "We're not suggesting that everyone should start using 70-year-old rifles," Colonel Anderson clarified. "But your experience suggests that we might achieve better results by allowing snipers to specialize more deeply with specific weapon systems rather than trying to maintain proficiency across multiple platforms." Elena appreciated the recognition, but she also understood that her approach represented just one path to sniper excellence. Different missions, different environments, and different tactical requirements would always demand flexibility in equipment and techniques. Her grandfather's rifle had succeeded because it matched her training background and personal capabilities, not because it was inherently superior to modern alternatives. As the meeting concluded, Elena reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. The mockery and skepticism she'd endured during her early months in Afghanistan had been challenging, but they had also motivated her to prove that unconventional approaches could achieve exceptional results when properly executed. The rifle that had once been dismissed as a museum piece had demonstrated its continued relevance in modern warfare. But more importantly, Elena had proven that success in precision shooting depended more on the shooter than on the sophistication of the equipment. Her grandfather's lessons about patience, preparation, and systematic skill development had proven their value in the most demanding circumstances possible. Later that evening, Elena sat in her quarters writing a letter to her grandmother, sharing news of the recognition her grandfather's rifle had received, and the impact his training had continued to have decades after his death. The continuity of military tradition across generations provided a perspective that few soldiers ever experienced, and Elena felt privileged to have served as a bridge between her grandfather's World War II service and modern military operations. "The rifle is performing as well as ever," she wrote. "Abuelo would be proud to know that his training and his weapon are still serving their country, still making a difference in protecting American soldiers and innocent people. The lessons he taught me about marksmanship have proven their worth in ways he probably never imagined." As deployment neared its end, Elena began considering her future in the Army and the legacy she wanted to leave for the next generation of snipers. The Hassan mission had demonstrated that exceptional performance could be achieved through dedication and systematic preparation, regardless of equipment limitations or conventional wisdom about optimal approaches. She had proven that her grandfather's rifle deserved respect rather than mockery, that historical weapons could remain relevant in modern warfare, and that individual skill and preparation often mattered more than technological sophistication. These lessons extended far beyond sniper operations, providing insights about human performance, equipment utilization, and the importance of preserving military traditions that had proven their value across multiple generations. The ancient equipment that had once drawn ridicule had eliminated a high-value target at 1,200 yards, contributing to mission success and saving lives in the process. Elena's grandfather would indeed have been proud, knowing that his rifle and his training methods had served their country once again, carried forward by a granddaughter who understood that some traditions earned their place through proven effectiveness, rather than modern fashion. Most importantly, Elena had learned that true expertise came not from having the newest equipment, but from understanding deeply whatever equipment you chose to master. Her grandfather's rifle had taught her that lesson, and now she would pass it on to others. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.